We left off last video by finishing our first pass at optimization. This video is going to be all about our final pass, but I want to talk about that real quick because usually when working on these projects, like it goes like this, right? We worked hard to finally get everything working, and then you take one pass at it to like optimize things, refactor. That's what we spent the past 5 videos doing, and we did a lot of work. And now we're going to go do our final pass, but that's only because this is just a course. If I was turning this project in, applying for a job, I would do probably 3 passes, right? Because again, that first pass, all we just spent the past 5 videos doing, you find so much. And then the second pass, you know, you start to maybe find 1 or 2 things or a little bit of things. And then I'll always give it like a third pass right before turning it in. And that's like, hopefully I don't have to change anything. But sometimes you may find 1 or 2 things. But again, I just want to talk to you about the process of kind of reviewing this before turning it in. And I think that is very, very important because again, back to the whole attention to detail. And remember, like you're being assessed on how this project looks, how it works, how you implemented it. So if somebody looks at your code base and they're like, wow, this is super neat, super organized, like everything's lined up correctly, all the spacing is consistent, there's no commented code laying around, like it's not sloppy. That is a great first impression. And that's what we're trying to do. Like I said, I've received take-home projects that were turned in that were just all kinds of crazy spacing. Like I said, commented code. It looked so sloppy. And I was honestly like, wow, like you really turned this in? Like, why would you do that? Like it was shocking to me. And you see that. So again, you're in competition, right? The company's going to be assessing your code against other candidates. So everything you can do to make yourself stand out is good. So that's why we've done all these optimization videos. We're doing this final pass. And I would even recommend doing more passes if you're turning this in for a job. So in this video, we're literally going to go file by file and review things. Now, that may sound like, holy crap, Sean, that's going to take forever. It's not, bear with me. Most files are going to be very, very quick. I've already kind of done like a dry run of this. But this is kind of, again, I want to mimic what you do. And what I'm doing right now is opening up all my folders and subfolders. And this is what I do I use this as like a checklist. Just to make sure I hit every file. So you see me going through, opening up all these so we have them all. And again, like I said, this is going to look like a lot, but most of these are going to go super quick. And what I'm looking for here is code aesthetics. Like, again, is my spacing consistent? Does it look good? Is it easy to read? Like when I say look good, I know many of you out there may be like saying, who cares how the code looks? But when I say look good, I mean easy to read, easy to reason about. You don't get a wall of text that is like 100 lines of just no spacing, just a complete wall of code. That's impossible to read. So that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. One interesting thing that I think is a good exercise that you should do is I also put myself or try to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's never seen this code base before. So when we go through this final pass, I'm looking at it through the lens of like, okay, if I was new in this code base and I'm looking at this, is this easy to reason about? Is this easy to understand what's going on? So I'm looking at it through that lens because that's a very big deal. And I don't know if any of you out there have jumped into a code base that you didn't write or you've tried to read somebody else's code. Sometimes that can be an absolute nightmare and it actually like demotivates you. Like I've gotten a contract that was on an existing project and I opened up the code and it was just horrendous. And my motivation to work on the project just immediately dropped. I was like, this is going to be a nightmare. You don't want to be that coder. You want people to come into your code bases and be like, wow, this is really neat, really easy to read, easy to understand. I'm excited to work here on this code base. That's what we're shooting for. So file by file, let's go. UI helper. Yeah, this is good. So let's talk about my spacing style. Again, a lot of this is going to be subjective styling, but at least you're going to see how I do it in my thought process. Feel free to adopt it. Feel free to change it, tweak it, make it your own. I'm just going to show you what I do. So under the imports, I like 1 vertical space. After the declaration of the class or the enum, I typically like 1 vertical space. Not in functions though. In functions, I don't do the vertical space. And then in between functions, I like 2 vertical spaces. We'll be talking about this as we go. You don't have to memorize my style. So UI helper looks good. GF error looks good. Things are lined up. Like I said, I do like the 1 space after the enum or class declaration. I just feel like that lets it breathe a little bit. So a little change there. Constants file. Again, 1 space after the import. 2 vertical spaces in between. And whatever style you choose, the most important thing is to just be consistent, you know, for the most part with that style. So if you like 1 space in between, that's fine. Now, again, I want to throw out a disclaimer. Me having 2 spaces in here, again, looks like it may be a ton of space, but you got to remember for these videos, I have my text blown up crazy big, right? If I were to make this, like this is how I normally code, right? Like if I'm not trying to make a video for you to make it easy to see. So that's why when it's this small, like 2 spaces makes it visually, like there's visual gaps that really makes things stand out. But again, my text has to be so big for these videos that 2 spaces may look huge to you. It's really not. Anyway, this might be going a little overboard. This is just how I think. See all these equal signs lined up? How it, if they're not completely lined up, I take it even further and just like, yep, let's line these up. I completely understand if you think this is ridiculous, you don't want to do this, but you'll see, I think this looks really good here. Again, especially if I like minimize it back to like my normal code, how all the equal signs are lined up. I just think that looks really neat and easy to read. So constants file, good to go. We've already refactored this a bit with our UI images here. So now what I do is when I'm done here, I minimize the utilities folder. I'm done. And we're going to go through the whole project and do this. Onto the network manager. Again, 1 space here. Again, I like a space after the declaration. We're good. We're good. One thing, I'm going to point you in the right direction. We're not going to deal with this in this course because I feel like our URLs are relatively simple. But I noticed in the comments, some people had typos in their URLs here that was causing bugs. There's a concept of URL components where you can kind of create your URL in like a URL component object. I'm going to leave a link to the documentation for that. And then Johnson Dell has a great article showing you how to use those. Again, I felt like it was a bit much for our simple URLs, but that is a very good thing that you could use if you want to research further. URL components, again, link in the description of the video. But back to the final pass of this. I think we're good. We've refactored this a lot already, right? We refactored it to our result type. We have all this spelled out. And again, remember, I'm keeping this is like the long way of doing it. Like I compared it to long division. But again, if we're trying to learn the fundamentals and learn how all this works, I think, leaving it this way will help you understand what's going on if you don't fully understand network calls, right? Like once you understand everything that's going on with network calls, now's the time to like refactor it and abstract some things away. I felt like abstracting this too much would take away from understanding what was really going on. Get user info, looks good. Again, I'm looking for, can I understand what's going on here? The spacing, again, we've already refactored our download image. Let's go let cache key right there. Cool. That's good. Persistence manager. Okay, so I'm going to only do 1 space between any like top enum or top protocol that I define out there. 1 space in between there. 2 spaces is a bit much. Because we only have 1 key, I'm going to do this. Again, this is just kind of like personal preference, 1 line, and then pull that back up there. Obviously, if we had more keys to declare, we would have to do that. Looking through here, looks good. Spacing, one thing we're going to talk about in a little bit, I'm not going to do it here because this is pretty straightforward, but when it comes to my switch statements, I like the cases. I don't like having, like in my add case, I don't like having like 20 lines of logic for the user to figure out. I like my add case to read like, hey, what's going on? Like our remove case is a perfect example of that. So when somebody's reading my code, again, putting yourself in the shoes of somebody who's looking at this, not knowing what's going on, if they see, okay, what happens in remove? Okay, favorites.remove all. Okay, cool, that's pretty self-explanatory. And you'll see in further files, we're gonna refactor this out, but I think this is fine, right? There's just 1 simple guard and then favorites.append. That's not too bad. But my preference, like my optimal, what I strive for is like just 1 line of code telling me what it does. Okay, retrieve favorites, pretty standard, nothing really to do there. Spacing's good. All right, persistence manager done. The model's probably gonna be pretty easy, not much there. Yep, user, not much there. Things look good. We switched out our lets and vars and all that stuff based on the optional. Cool, model's done. Extension, UI view controller extension. Okay, again, consistency, right? 1 space in between the imports and the declaration. Present on main thread, that looks good. Present Safari VC, good to go. Okay, UI view controller extension done. Date extension, like I said, a lot of these are gonna go fast. Yep, looks good, pretty simple. UI view, again, we just put our pin to edges in there, and then we have our add subviews. Looks good to me. UI table view, super simple, no big deal. All right, extensions done. And again, the reason I'm going through these quick is like I'm looking, does it look neat? Is the style consistent? And is it easily readable for somebody new coming into the code base? And if I see an opportunity to refactor, we'll jump on it. We're going to refactor a couple things, but just to let you know my mindset as I'm going through these. All right, now we're in our custom views. UI tab bar controller. Again, we just refactored this a little bit ago. 1 space there, spacing's good. All right, looks good there. Labels, GF title label. We have our inits, convenience init, and all this stuff. Pretty straightforward. The body label, same thing, the inits, convenience init. properties. Pretty straightforward. So this is, again, back to the wall of text. Obviously, this isn't a wall of text. It's only like 7 or 8 things. But this is getting borderline where I would like to insert a line for just visual, grouping is what I call it. So secondary label, I think we're going to come to our text field is going to be a good example of that. So secondary label, spacing's consistent. Things look good. All right. No, there's really no opportunity to refactor here. So labels are done. View controllers. All right, now we're getting into some big stuff here because this GF item info VC has a lot of code. Again, one space in between like the protocol and the class declaration. Our variables are there. I like to do 2 spaces in between variables and my methods because like this is the start of the methods, and I like to go init methods, view lifecycle methods, and then whatever, then basic configuration methods, and then whatever else is in there. That's kind of the order and the flow that I like to do. Inits are always up at top. Then you get like view did load, view will appear, view will disappear, that section, and then you get into like the actual code. All right, so this is looking good so far. Our view did load, again, reads like a table of contents. That's what we want. You're gonna hear me talk about that a bit in this video. All right, looking good, looking good. Yeah, that all looks pretty good, actually. Nothing really to do there. Repo item VC, this is the subclass of that. Again, I like two vertical spaces between all my list of variables and my methods. Got 1 space between the protocol and the class. Cool, pretty straightforward. 1 space, 1 space, 2 space, cool. Again, pretty straightforward. There's not much to these ones. Like I said, a lot of these files, gonna be quick. Alert VC, scrolling down here again. So you can see this is what I'm talking about, some like logical spacing visually. So when we're declaring all of our like UI elements, and then I do, a visual space, vertical space. Now these are like, titles, that type of variable. This is like UI variables. So, one option would be to just make them all like one giant stack of variables, right? Well, to me, this makes it like harder to read, especially if you had like, imagine having like 5 or 6 more of them. It's just a giant wall of text. We try to avoid walls of text. So again, I visually and logically group them with this spacing. So like I talked about, right? Our UI items here, these type of variables here, and then UI stuff here. And again, that's very subjective, but it just makes things stand out and easier to kind of group them in your mind at a quick glance. So again, our initializer methods, view did load here. Okay, so this is another example of visually separating things. I like to put a space there because look, we got our view.background color, view.add subviews, and now we're getting to our individual configurations. To me, that's a logical grouping visually. And you can see how it like just stands out visually as your eye is skimming over the file. Okay, we're configuring the container view, title label. Okay, pretty standard, straightforward stuff. All of our spacing is good. The code looks good overall. You know what I'm going to do actually? I'm going to start minimizing the code a little bit because you shouldn't really need to see the code. Whenever I type new code, I'll blow it back up again. But we're talking about overall file structure, how the code looks. So I think, making it smaller so you can see the bigger picture and how clean and neat and organized the code looks, I think that's going to be more helpful. So user info VC delegate here, we're going to keep going through this. These are all UI elements, 2 spaces there, things look good. All right, here's our first bit of refactoring. So I'll blow up the font a little bit here. So we just did this last optimization video. So what you're going to see is some of the stuff we did in the optimization videos on this pass, we're even tweaking those even further. So that is also the value of like more passes, right? And the reason I want to stress these passes is because I don't want to give the impression that programming and coding is like, everything perfectly from the start. Like you've seen a lot of my mistakes in this course, right? And at first I was a little self-conscious, like, oh crap, they're paying for a course. I got to be perfect. But after like 1 or 2, I was like, no, that's not giving off the right impression. Like programming is making mistakes, coming back and fixing them. I compare it to sculpting. Like you sculpt your code. You start off, if you're like, I don't know, sculpting a rock, this big giant rough boulder, and then you slowly chisel it down into something beautiful. And that's why we keep going over these, passes and stuff like that. So that's why I left a lot of my mistakes in and went back and fixed them later, because that gives a real picture of like what development's actually like. Like you don't just know everything and have everything perfect, type out your code and you're done. Like that's not how it works. So I don't want to give off that impression. Anyway, along those lines, right, we created this download avatar image function, and we're also calling it here. Well, we're calling this in like 3 spots. You'll see that as well. So I think this can be refactored, do Command X, onto our avatar image view, which is right down here. So in GF avatar image view, we can call download avatar image. Well, we're just going to call it download image because it's going to be like avatar image view dot download image. And then we're going to have to pass in a avatar URL. So we can say from URL, and we'll call it URL there, and that's going to be a string. And the reason I named it like from URL and not just from is because I want them to know that I want the user of the code to know that you have to pass in a URL here. If I just did from and then the type was string, it could be a little bit confusing that they can pass in any string. I want to really let the user know, and you'll see at the call site when we use that. So here, this is instead of user.avatar URL, it's going to be URL, and do Command B. We're going to go up. This is not the self avatar image view. This is just self.image now, because now we're on the avatar image view. Self.image view equals image, and go back here. So now instead of download image, and remember we don't need that function anymore, we can do avatar image view dot download image, and see how it says from URL. You're letting the user of the code know, hey, I need a URL, and it's going to be user dot avatar URL. And we'll refactor it in the other two places and then come back and test it here. So the other places, right? This is that was our user info header VC. So we know we have it in our collection view cells as well. Those are the other two places. So go to follower cell, and then here, see, we're doing this network stuff here to download the image. We can delete that, and now we can do avatar image view dot download image from URL, and again, this is going to be follower dot avatar URL. So this makes this much cleaner, and we don't have to do this network call in all these places. And then again, favorite cell, same thing. We have this network call, boom. But again, I just did this like a couple optimization videos ago, right? This wasn't optimization. Turned out to be a little bit, not fully optimized. So that's why doing multiple passes, you'll catch things like this. So delete that, and we can do avatar image view dot download image from favorite dot avatar URL. All right, so let's test this real quick. Let's go to iPhone 11 Pro. We need to test our favorite screen, our follower, and our header info VC to make sure we're still downloading the image properly. So here we'll check our favorites first. Favorite, cool. We got our avatar. That's good. I guess we can just click here. Our followers, yep, follower avatars are still working, and we'll click on a user, and the user info VC is working as well. So that refactor is done and tested. So let's go back to our user info VC. I'll minimize a bit so you can see the overall layout of the code. So we refactored that. Now look, we have this add subviews. Well, make this big again to show you. So we have this function of add subviews, and all we're doing, right, we just did this in an optimization video where we added our add subviews extension. Well, we need a function for just one line of code. Yes, I get it reads a little simpler by just calling add subviews up here in view to load, but I don't know. I kind of like just yanking this out, and instead of calling add subviews, just doing that line of code because it reads well. View.add subviews and all the views. Like there's no confusion about what's going on there. So that also allows us to get rid of this whole function here. So just a little bit of cleanup. Again, the less code, like you've read some large view controllers, right? If a view controller is 400 or 500 lines of code, it's pretty tricky to read and understand. But, so the less code, the better, again, without being too clever and too confusing. Remember, it's a balance. It's just easy to read. So like this view controller is 92 lines of code, and most of it is just the constraint, the layout. So again, making them as small as possible without being confusing is kind of the sweet spot you want to shoot for. So continuing on down here, this layout UI, again, it's just all constraints, pretty straightforward. Moving on. Data logic VC, again, this is what we just refactored, or data loading VC, I'm sorry, what we just refactored. Looks good. We already kind of fixed this container view thing. All right, looks good to me. Spacing is consistent. So minimize our view controllers. Now avatar image view. All right, we just added to this, but let's double check. Yep, good to go here. Minimize image views, text fields. Okay, so again, spacing is consistent. So this is what I want to talk about that like logical grouping, right? Again, this is what I'm talking about with wall of text here, right? Bam, bam. That can be just tricky to like read. That's just that giant wall. But again, if you group things logically and then separate them visually. So up here, right, we have layer, layer, layer. This is basically our border. So bam. And then this has to do with all like text size stuff, text color, text size, font. So that's a good logical space. And this is kind of all like miscellaneous stuff. So that is how I group things together and then space them out visually, right? I always say, let the code breathe a little bit. If it's just 100 lines of straight code, super hard to read. Let it breathe, group them logically, makes your code base a lot cleaner. So minimize text fields, GF button. Pretty straightforward, pretty good to go. Okay, one little minor thing here in this configure. See how it's like equal sign, and then you break the list of equal signs. This is like super minor. Cut this, and then I'm just gonna put it down here. And again, this is like super nitpicky, super dialing it in, and I probably don't have to even have those spaced over. Yep, we're tabbing it over a bit more. So like I said, that one was like super nitpicky, but again, attention to detail. So our button's good. GF empty state view. So this is where also in an optimization video, I didn't do things perfectly optimal, and we can optimize even further. And real quick, we got two spaces between the variables. And scrolling down here, this is where I made a mistake. And this was just in an optimization video. So like I said, we're optimizing optimizations on our second pass. So I don't know what I was thinking. I mean, well, I do know what I was thinking. We'll get to that in a separate file, but you don't need to yank all this out. Like, this was ridiculous. All we need to do, right? This is the only line we need, line 45. We just need different constants conditionally based on our device type. So let's put this back into the array that we did here. This constraint here, our center Y constraint. So put that back into the array. We can delete these two things, right? Because the only thing that we need that's conditional is our constant. And we get that constant, and then we plug in the constant here in the constraint. So I overcomplicated that unnecessarily. So that's another thing you got to watch out for. And then we have the same thing down here, right? So let's take the constraint, Command X, put it back into our, that's bottom anchor. Again, I like to do things like kind of logically how they flow. So put the bottom anchor on the bottom. We no longer need this code because, again, all we were doing conditionally is our constants here, and then we just plug that constant in there. So again, that was something I overcomplicated, but now we're further optimizing. All right, so this is good to go. GF item info view. Again, back to one space in between like any enums or protocols I define up here between the class declaration. Looking good, just some constraint stuff. Cool. Yep, that looks pretty straightforward. Good to go. Again, like back to like how clean and neat and easy it is to read. Like I think this is a good example of how you can make it look neat to be easier to read. All right, GF alert container view. Pretty straightforward. Nothing too crazy. Cool. Views are done. Cells. I think cells are pretty straightforward. Yep. Spacing is consistent. We just refactored this, so we just did that. We probably don't need that space there. Okay, good to go. Favorite cell. Same thing, check for the spacing. Same thing, probably group this stuff up here. All right, good to go there. So you can see we're moving right along. Custom views are done. Now, obviously, our screens are going to be a lot here. So search VC. So back to, remember when I said with the constraint overcomplication, I was like, I don't know what I was thinking. Well, what I was thinking was and this was completely unnecessary, like creating this logo image view top constraint and creating it as a variable outside of the scope. The reason you would do this, and this is what I was thinking when I did it, was a lot of times when you're animating objects around the screen, whether it's a button or a view or an image view, a lot of times you'll animate the constraint. Well, in order to animate the constraint, you have to create a variable to access it like outside of the scope because your animation is going to be in a separate function rather than your like initial setup. So I was used to doing that. So that's why I did this here, complete brain fart. But we don't even need this variable out here. So we'll delete that. And then back down to here, right? All we needed was this constant based on the conditional, just like we just did here. So we can take our constraint that we had down here, hit Command X, again, put it back into the array, put the comma there. We can delete this line of code. Again, this is the same stuff we just did. The only difference here in the search VC was I had that variable declared up top that was completely unnecessary. Let top constraint, again, we're just conditionally setting the constraint and we're putting it back in here. So cool, good to go there. Let's test that real quick. Again, anytime you're moving stuff around like that, we want to test it. So on the iPhone SE, let's make sure our logo is towards the top on our search VC. Yep, there it is. And if we tap the text field, do Command K with the keyboard, yep, still good to go. Okay, just wanted to test that real quick. Configure text field, configure call to action, spacing looks good, overall is good. Okay, go back to minimizing here. Follower list VC. All right, I don't have my equal signs lined up here. Let's do that. Again, I've said it 1,000 times. I completely understand if you don't like this or don't want to do it. That's fine. I just like the way that looks, and I think it's easier to read. Okay, scrolling down, everything looks good. Again, view did load, reads like a table of contents. Configure view controller. That looks good. Looks good. Okay, so here's a bit of refactoring. Let's zoom in here. So, like I said before, this success case is kind of long in my opinion, right? So again, back to putting yourself into the shoes of somebody reading your code for the first time, they're gonna be like, okay, what happens on success? And they actually have to read code, like to figure out what all is going on. Now they can figure it out for sure, but you're gonna make them spend 15, 30 seconds, like reading, trying to figure it out, and then you hope that they understand what you did. Whereas if you refactor this into a function, you can tell them exactly what you're doing. So that's what we're going to do here. Let's create a function. So well, let's talk about it. What are we doing? What do we want to tell the reader of our code that we're doing? Well, we get our followers back, and essentially we're appending it. We're either showing the empty state or updating data. So we're basically like configuring the UI based on the array of followers. So what we can do here is we can create a function, and I'll make this big, 1, 2, 3, func called update UI, and then with, and we're going to pass in an array of follower. And then we literally just going to all of our success case here, Command X, paste that into here, and then call. Self.update UI with followers, and then we pass in the followers that we get here, again, the local one. So again, how I like my, and this is ideal, right? This doesn't always work out. Sometimes you can't make it nice and neat, one line. This is like the dream, right? But I always strive to make, my switch cases, whatever's in there, to be very, very short and easy to understand what's going on. Again, back to somebody being new into your code base. Now when they're reading this, they're like, okay, I'm getting followers. What's happening here? Okay, on success, okay, I'm updating the UI with the followers. On a failure, we're presenting an alert. Bam, straightforward, like very, very easy to understand. And then again, back to the whole, like your code is kind of like a table of contents. If the reader of this code wants to be like, okay, well, what exactly are they doing in update UI? Then they can like dive into this function and reason about this. But when you just have all this code in your success case, they have to like read and focus on like, okay, what is going on here? Like, am I missing something? Are they doing anything weird in here? You're putting them in that mindset of like, what is going on? But when you just create a function called update UI, like you're telling them what's going on in this little batch of code. Like, hey, we're updating the UI with the followers. And they're like, okay, cool. And then that even helps them when they're reading the code, they're in that mindset of like, okay, all we're doing is updating UI. So now that makes this like way easier to understand. Again, not like this is crazy complex code, but you can imagine if you were doing a lot of complex stuff in your success case and maybe you break it down into like 2 functions, like update UI and then do this. You just make it easier on the reader of your code, and that's super important. So, okay, moving on, scrolling down, we're good here. Again, here's another case, right? This is our add button tapped. This is where we're adding the user to favorites. So here in the success case, yeah, we create our favorite, we do persistence manager update, and then, we're presenting errors. Again, I want to create a new function down here called func add user to favorites. And then it takes in a user of type user. And then we are literally going to cut, paste, and let's make sure we call that here. So self dot add user to do Command B to get my autocomplete. Again, I don't trust it if it doesn't autocomplete. Self dot add user. Okay, here's a good learning thing. So when I created this function, I created it like inside this. So here's a neat little Xcode trick. So let me actually cut this function because I put it in the wrong spot, minimize this. So basically this was a curly brace error. I was like, why don't I have that? So if you like use your arrow keys and go back and forth over the curly brace, you can see that yellow thing flashing. That'll tell you where you're at. So when I created that function, I created it inside this network manager closure. That's not what we want to do. So down here on this brace, okay, cool. That's the end of my add button tapped. So I want to add that add user function down here. Again, little chance to show you a tip. So now I can I'll do Command B to make sure we get that. Now I can do self.add user to favorites and then user. So again, back to the switch statement, reading, super simple. When they do the add button tapped, you can see, okay, on success, I'm adding user to favorites, cool. Failure, done. And then if they want to dig deeper into add user to favorites, they can. It's going to be easier to understand. All right, so let's keep going. And yep, things look good here. I may want to, yeah, probably do that. Again, it's minor details, but they do add up. Okay, cool. So follower list VC, good. Favorites list VC, scroll. Again, you can see like some visual spacing, logical. All right, here, same thing. Our success statement is a bit tricky here. So we're going to basically do the same thing. Again, let's double check this curly brace. Yep, that is after the get favorites. So what are we doing here? We are basically, again, we're basically updating the UI with our favorites. So func update UI with, and then we're going to pass in an array of followers. So basically the same function we had there, and then we're going to Command X, Command V, and then, oh, we didn't give this a name. So update with, we need to call it favorites. Command B. So if the favorites we pass in is empty, show the empty state, self.favorite. So we do need the self so we can, determine between this favorites and then this favorites up here, right? This favorites up here is self.favorites, whereas just normal favorites down here is this favorites that we passed in. And again, this will turn green, this will be white, so easy way. And then, yeah, we're just dispatching to the queue, reloading data, good to go. So now, just like before, this is very repetitive. We've done this 3 times now. So now we call self.update UI with favorites. There we go. So do Command B. Good to go. Let's test that real quick. Again, get off this iPhone SE. If I don't have to be on it, I don't want to be on it. So let's go to our favorite screen to make sure this this is good. Good to go. Cool. We retrieved it. We updated favorites. All right, we're working here. But again, switch statement reads nice and clean. All right, so keep moving. Probably don't need these tabbed over this far. Nope, we do. Okay. All right, looks good. User info VC, the last view controller, almost done here. Again, spacing consistent. We just did the scroll view stuff. So remember, we visually separated that. 2 spaces there. Things are looking good. Things look good. Our success and failure case are pretty simple. Things look good. This, I'm going to leave this layout UI function, but what are we at? Like almost 30 lines of code. This is borderline where I would try to refactor this somehow. If anything were to be added to this function, I would probably think about it and think of how to separate it, how to redo it. It's fine, but it's getting close to not being fine. Just to let you know, again, into my mindset here. Yeah, looks good. Looks good here. Looks good. It's good. It's good. It's good. Cool. So we literally just went. Well, let's double check the scene delegate. Yep. Variable function. Again, we're not doing that space there. Yep. Looks good. Minimize. So we literally just went file by file on our final pass. We are done. We are ready to send the email. Congratulations. Hope you get the job. Well, you'll get to the next interview. Usually the take-home project is like one of the first steps in the interview process, but hopefully this gets you on to the next stage. So that wraps up the course. That's all the videos. There may be some bonus videos about testing and instruments later, but those are going to be pure bonus. I don't want to like include those in the marketing of the course, but I do have like a conclusion and wrap-up video coming up. So that will be the final video of the course, but this was like the final learning lesson. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you in the next video.